Okay, so as we continue, we'll look at step 4. So the last part is to then take your assessment of what the language needs are and use that to write a language objective related to the content lesson. So the basic structure of a language objective is very similar to the basic structure of a content objective. You have some statement about the learner will be able to, or the student will, the learner will, something like that. Student will be able to for the first circle. This blue circle, the second circle is you have a measurable outcome. So the next part you need is a measurable outcome verb. And there's a list on this slide for you that are some different measurable verbs that would be good for language objectives. And then the last circle shows you the different the different categories of things that you might include for the last part of the objective. So those, for language objectives, those would include skills, functions, grammar, strategies, or vocabulary required for the language tasks in the lesson. Okay, and we can break that down into even further. And we see two basic templates. There are probably more, but this comes from one of my favorite books for teaching English learners, and they recommend two basic templates. And I think it's easy for novice teachers to understand these two templates. So the first one focuses on, we break the end of the objective up into two parts. So the first one shows what we do. We'd have our learner will be able to, plus our measurable outcome verb, and then we add a specific structure or specific vocabulary words that we want the students to learn, and then what function we want them to be able to do with that structure. The second template, again, we start with learner will be able to, or student will be able to, plus your measurable outcome verb, plus this time, instead of having a specific structure, we start with the language function and add the context. So what the students will be able to do with the language, and then in what context or in what situation will they be able to do that. So let's look at the first template, which is the structure function format. So some specific examples of language structure would be like past tense verbs or present tense or adjectives or comparatives, or specific vocabulary words like condensation, evaporation, and precipitation, like very specific words that you're going to target in the lesson. Examples of language functions would be anything that the student will do with the language. What will they do with it? Are they going to explain? Are they going to give an opinion? Are they going to ask for information or compare? Anything that they're doing with the language. What are they going to accomplish with the language? So this is one way to set it up. So you want them to be able to use past tense verbs. Learners will be able to use past tense verbs to explain something that happened in history. Can't think of. To explain ancient Egyptian government or something like that. I don't know, but something in the past tense. But that's a really good one for history because that's a structure that they would need. So use past tense verbs to explain what the Pilgrims agreed to in the Mayflower Compact or something like that. So that would be a structure plus function. The structure being the past tense verbs, the function being to explain something. Here's some more examples. So the student will be able to, first one, use comparatives. That would be like bigger, wider, higher. Use comparatives to compare geographic features. So we got a specific structure with a function. Students will use the words north, south, east, and west to direct peers to a specific map location. So for example, I could see this being like an information gap activity where one student is looking at a map and has to get directions from the other student. And that student uses the words north, south, east, and west to give directions to see if that peer can find his way on the map to a certain spot. And so you could see where that would be when you're teaching cardinal directions, and it'd be a fun information gap activity where the students could work together and they would be speaking. One would have to speak to the other using those words. Construct an argument with 3 reasons to support a position. So students will be able to construct an argument with 3 reasons. So there's your specific structure. It's a discourse level. They're going to have it's a discourse level language need, because they're going to need more than one sentence to explain that. So how do you structure an argument with 3 reasons? And what transition words do you use and things like that? So that would be discourse structure. And the function is to support an opinion. So that could be, a social studies assignment, or it could be an English language arts assignment. Either way. Student will be able to speak using the words precipitation, evaporation, and condensation. And with what function? To explain the water cycle. Student will be able to write using signal words that show cause and effect, like as a result of, or because, and therefore, to summarize the causes of the Civil War. So what are they using? The function is to summarize. What specific structure? Specific transition words, like as a result of. Okay, so here's some examples for the other template, which is the function plus context format. So in this case, we're looking at function, again, what students will do with the language, but this time we are going to show when or how they will complete that function in small groups, with a partner, during discussion, in an essay, reading a short story. When are they using that function of language? So here are specific examples for that structure. Students will ask for information from native speakers. So you might set up something where their students are having to get information from each other for some reason, and they're having to ask each other for information. And students will use interrupting techniques correctly during discussion. So you could actually teach that social function of language, where how do you politely join in the discussion or jump in or interrupt in an appropriate way. And then see, are the students using those during the discussion? Students will describe observations using during a laboratory experiment. Describing is the function. Describe observations is the function. When? During a laboratory experiment. Students will listen to take notes during a science video. So the language function is they're taking notes, using words to take notes, writing to take notes. And then when? During a science video. Students will identify the main idea while reading a social studies passage. So the function would be identifying the main idea. The context in when or how is while reading a social studies passage. Students will speak to request information in cooperative learning groups. So they might have having to, again, requesting information, asking for information in a cooperative learning group. So where do the ELPs fit in? The ELPs fit in between steps 3 and 4. So when you have generated your list of vocabulary or figured out what language structures or functions that students need to understand or know or use to be able to participate in the lesson and understand the lesson, so then from there you go, depending on what you choose, then you're going to go to ELPs that relate to those specific vocabulary or functions, and then use that, locate an ELPs expectation statement, and then use that to write your language objective. So combine the two, the language needs, plus the ELPs, and then write the language objective based on the needs. Here's some examples on some of ELPs alignment with things that the examples we've already looked at. So let's say, and the first set of 3 at the top are related to the function context structure of a language objective. So students will listen to take notes during a science video. Well, let's say we have, as a content objective, you have students will understand, some concept that you're showing them a video about. And so you think, okay, well, to access this video, students are going to have to listen. My ELLs are going to have to listen. And they're going to have to be able to get information from this video. And so I go and look in listening in listening ELPs, and I find, oh, 2F, listen to and derive meaning from a variety of media. Okay, so how are we going to know if what are they going to do to derive meaning? They're going to take notes. So listen to take notes during a science video aligns specifically with that. So we say, okay, from ELPs, they're going to listen to and derive meaning from media. Okay, so now what function are we going to use? They're going to take notes and what context during a science video. Listen to take notes during a science video. Similarly, you have identify the main idea while reading a social studies passage. And so if I were looking, I'm thinking, okay, I've got, the students are going to be reading this passage. What do I want them to be able to do language-wise? Well, I'd like for them to be able to understand it. So let me go, and they're going to be reading. So let me go look at reading ELPs. Well, then I find this reading ELP about comprehension. 4I, demonstrate English comprehension and expand reading skills by distinguishing main ideas. Well, there are lots of different comprehension skills listed in that ELPS expectation, but I'm only really interested in the main idea when I decide, okay? So I'm going to think about, okay, that makes sense for this lesson, for them to understand the main idea. So that's the comprehension skill in that ELPS statement that I'm going to focus on. Okay, so now let me think about what language function they would be doing and what context. We want them to be able to identify the main idea, and the context is while reading a social studies passage. Let's move down to the second box, the second orange, bold, bright orange row, and that one actually has a misprint. It should say measurable verb and then language structure, and then instead of context, it should say language function. So this is the structure function. So let's look at the first one. So the lesson is about the water cycle, and you're introducing the water cycle, or you're introducing the words. They've learned the words precipitation, evaporation, and condensation. And so you think, okay, well, I want to know that they understand the cycle. So I want them to be able to explain the cycle to me. Maybe the content objective is students will explain the elements of the water cycle. Okay, so language-wise, if they don't know precipitation is evaporation and condensation, they're not really going to be able to explain the water cycle in the scientific way. And so let's focus on vocabulary. And if they're going to explain, they need to be speaking and writing. And so then I think, okay, so going from my content objective to the language need, and then looking at ELPs, so that I find there's an ELPs speaking, there's an ELPs speaking expectation on vocabulary. Speak using grade level content vocabulary in context. Okay, so how can I apply that? Well, I can apply that with the structure function language objective. And so I come up with speak using the words precipitation, evaporation, and condensation, specific vocabulary to explain the water cycle. So not only are you assessing if students just know the steps or the stages and it can explain the water cycle, you're assessing, are they using those specific words correctly? And then it becomes really easy to assess, because then you just look and see, where the students are able to use those words in their explanation, yes or no. If they're not, then you need to go back and reteach the words. If they are, then they have met the objective. Similarly, the last one, if I know I'm trying to teach the causes of the Civil War, and let's say I'm at the end of that section of my unit or whatnot, and I want them to be able to summarize. So that's part of my content objective, is that students can identify the causes of the Civil War. And so I think, okay, well, how would I want to know, do they know these? Well, in order for them to produce something, they need to be speaking or writing. So you decide, well, it's the end of the lesson, I want them to write. So let me look at the ELPS the ELPS expectations for writing. And I want them to write the causes of the Civil War. And I see, okay, connecting words, that makes sense for writing up the causes, because one thing has to cause another, and you're going to use different words to explain that in your summary. So using signal words like as a result of, or because, or therefore. So then you come up, okay, so that one makes sense also to use specific, use the structure of the objective structure of specific language structure plus function. So then you can come up with, well, I want them to write. What do I want them to write? I want them to use specific structures of signal words while they're writing. The function then is to summarize. And what do they summarize? Well, that's related to back to your content objective, that your content objective was about the causes of the Civil War. So that's based on ELPS 5F, right, using connecting words. And I'm out of time you have to go to